and welcome to Reveal's 2020 webinar series, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kelly, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. Our series of webinars provides insights on how to best leverage your SAP asset as it relates to your business and how each functional area will be affected by S/4HANA. Today, we're going to set the stage for turning SAP into an asset by maximizing enterprise asset management. Today's webinar is going to last about 30 to 45 minutes, followed by a question and answer period at the end. So please capture your questions in the question or chat section, and we will record the webinar and have it available on the Reveal website later today under resources. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker, Sean Ellis. Sean is a senior partner at Reveal who's responsible for delivery of optimization solutions that enhance business effectiveness, competitiveness, and profitability. He has been actively involved with local and international supply chain markets for more than 25 years, building strategic situation-based interventions and solutions. Just to name a few clients where successful engagements have been completed and required, adaptations made include Ryerson Steel, Borg-Warner, BP, Moen, MTS Systems Corporation, Delicato Family Wines, and W.R. Grace. So I would just want to welcome Sean, and you can go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you, Christy, much appreciated. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope you're all staying safe in this time of COVID. I know we're getting to sometimes attend more webinars than maybe we've done in the past, although we are now at a stage, I think, where work's opening up and people are going back to school and all sorts of things. So maybe we have less time at the same time. But anyway, for today's session around enterprise asset management, I thought we'd go through the agenda that's in front of you. And I'm going to start by talking about the business imperative and why it's important and the value that it adds. We'll talk a bit then about asset management performance per se, look at some nuances around work management and enterprise asset management strategy, given the importance of strategy to enable us to go forward and execute effectively. Then I want to deal with some things around integration and SAP integration across the functional areas. Talk at a high level around PM planning and getting it to work for us. What are some of the issues that we need to be aware of? And then just some considerations for S/4HANA going forward before we wrap it up. So that's going to be the agenda that we're going to work through today. So let's kick it off right up front with the whole notion of the business imperative. Now, the strategic imperative really argues that EAM adds significant value to the business. And that's in terms of things like labor, its materials, downtime, increased productivity, and the like. And if we accept that the research shows us that somewhere between 20 and 40% of product cost is accounted towards the maintenance side, then one can understand the importance and the impact and the relevant insight that EAM brings to the table. One of the things, if you look at the bottom of the screen here, the researcher suggested that $1 million of saving in maintenance contributes as much to profits as increasing sales by $3 million. So if those are correct and those are real, then really the whole EAM space does provide a significant value add to the business. And we need to take it seriously. We need to make sure we're able to utilize all that functionality and be able to drive things forward, because it really is a key to the return on investment that we're looking at from an organization. And so if we talk about ROI and we start talking about the dynamics that make that up, the notion of best practice and the ability to be able to optimize our working within the system and aligning it with people, process, technology really becomes very important. And we start to see that the effect on things like plant uptime, it's around cost savings that can be reached because we avoid the necessity of unnecessary maintenance. How do we extend the life cycle of our equipment, our machinery, etc., managing risks, repair time, and then of course just managing the risk of obsolescence and making sure we have the right size inventory at the right time. So the return on investment formula really does point to the fact that we have in the strategic imperative a lot of value to add from the enterprise asset management perspective. Now, I wanted to just take that to kind of another level to say that, well, you know, that's fine for an organization. We can talk about return on investment, but if I look at this particular screen here on the top right-hand part of the screen, there's some really telling percentage improvements that the business has been able to achieve or exhibit because of the fact that they're effectively using the wherewithal and organizationally driven to get enterprise asset management working in their favor. You know, when I read things like 28% increase in maintenance productivity, I mean, those things are huge. And we saw in the opening slide as well, the fact that productivity in the USA, somewhere between 40 and 60% improvements are possible as a result. So these are really, from a business point of view, and I'm an executive, I'm saying, man, I need to go after these things because this is really going to add value to my business. But then looking at the left-hand side is more like, well, where do the operational folk fit and what can we control? And I've listed there 10 drivers of return on investment improvement as we look down that left-hand side. And the first 4 of those, what they do is they impact around the issue of revenue and around capabilities. 5, 6, and 7, which is the labor, the service costs, and material costs, really akin to our operating costs, and we know exactly what it is that we have ahead of us to manage that. 8 and 9 are really around our fixed capital, and the last one, inventory turns, really important for us, is around managing of working capital. And so as long as we are managing those dynamics effectively, we have the opportunity in terms of making sure that that end result of the return on investment to the business is where it needs to be at, and we can take the business from a value perspective to a much higher level than it may be today. So I want to encourage us to look then at those dynamics on the left-hand side, because those are the things that are in our wheelhouse, they're in our ability to influence, they're inside of our ability to manage, and as we drive those through to successful completion, we will have a impact on the return on investment. So I think the opening thesis is that there is tremendous value to be obtained from enterprise asset management, and it is an important business imperative. So let's talk then a little bit about asset management performance per se. And you know, I want to just say that there are 4 real performance layers, if you want to call it, that come alongside the whole asset management process. And these start at the organizational level in terms of organizational direction, management, what are the objectives and goals and dynamics that we're going to be looking for and going after. And it takes us through what is the asset condition management, what are the processes that we're going to follow in terms of monitoring, in terms of inspection, in terms of getting to reliability. And then, of course, within that, what's our reliability strategy management look like, so that we are managing failure, we're managing risks, we are solving our problems, and just driving ongoing improvement into the business. And against that, we're then in a position to start talking about effective execution management, where we are planning and scheduling, we're making sure the materials are online, we've got quality delivery, and we're moving into a more proactive approach in terms of how we deal with things. So I wanted to put that out there as those 4 performance layers, which are really going to be important for us. And the reason is that we have a desired outcome where we're wanting to make sure that our planning is effective, our execution to that plan is aligned, and that we have, at the end of the day, integration happening up and down the supply chain between what was planned, what is scheduled, and what is actual. And if we start looking at what typically happens as we're setting out that maintenance planning process, I mean, we start off by making sure that the work to be initiated is prioritized. We got approval, we know what the plan's starting to look like. We then set into about trying to schedule that. What does the budgets look like, what resources and so on. With that, we want to make sure that there's availability of materials. Where does that come from, and how does that feed through into MRP so that the supply side of the house is in fact on time with the right materials, getting it to us so that we can move on to the next phase, which is the execute of the work. So therefore, then we start printing our job cards. We make sure that there's task feedback at the end of the day in terms of what's gone down. We settle the costs so that that's done as soon as possible after the work is completed and we get to closure. And so really that's the desired outcome, is an effective end-to-end process. And this is really looking at it from the context of a maintenance planning board that gives us an indication. There's a little picture on the top right-hand corner there of a planning board that can show us exactly what's going down with what orders, when are they scheduled for, and how we're managing and tracking against that. And that's really important for us, because the next thing we want to do is we want to say, well, how does that impact beyond just maintenance? Now here what we're trying to do is to overlay our enterprise asset management focus and approach into our production planning approach within the organization. So in this instance here, with the alignment and the links to production planning is really important, because we are monitoring our work orders on the one hand, we're getting materials available on the other, and then on top of that, we're overlaying it on top of production so that we can ensure that the plan, be it from production, be it from maintenance, wherever, the schedule and the actual stay aligned with one another, and that we end up with an integrated bunch of processes and procedures that are driving that plan. Our objectives of doing the right task at the right time with the right resources is achieved, and we are shifting ourselves into a proactive approach of corrective and preventive maintenance rather than into that reactive mode that we talk about. So I think those are the things I wanted to put out there really as part of the asset management performance dynamic. That then said, is what about the integration across the different functional areas within SAP? And I want to look at two things. One is around, well, what do they look like? And secondly, I want to get on to say, well, okay, how do we make all of this happen? So this is just a depiction of the enterprise asset management function right in the center, surrounded by the various modules in SAP that have some form of touch point, have some sort of linkage back into it. And you can see we touch basically on everything. In the materials management space, we're talking about inventory management, around purchasing. Is MRP giving us what we need to do? Are we driving our service levels, service entry sheets, and our service masters, etc., and got the master data correct? Costing wise, have all those cost elements been set up correctly, and are we able to see the outcome? Are we testing and measuring our equipment? Are we using project systems, for argument's sake, and work breakdown structures to manage our projects and our programs as we go forward? And of course, it knocks into things like the employee skills, production planning, which I gave us as an example in the last slide as part of the overlay. And what's happening in that space? When are our lines going to be down that we can't continue, for maintenance rather, that we can't continue to produce? And how do we manage those things within it? And then there's important areas of health and safety, which is fundamental to the EAM space. And then, of course, the whole notion of the financial component, and even as far as real estate for our functional locations is concerned. So very, very much an integrated perspective, and we should be looking at it within that integrated space, because what tends to happen is organizations get so silo focused and get caught in these silos that we can't see the wood for the trees. And so I'm a materials management guy, that's what I'm doing. Here's my stuff and I get on with it. And yet I have a phenomenal and important impact back into the guys that are involved in the EAM space, and sometimes those integrations are not happening and they break it down. So if we look organizationally as to, well, okay, how do we do this? How do we plan for effective integration at the end of the day? And I'd like to just share this as a model that we use around getting to effective data analysis and reporting, and also driving the notion of integration across the board. And the first thing is really around the business objectives. What are the business objectives that we as an organization are going after? Is it to reduce the total cost of asset ownership, for instance? Is it around increasing availability and reliability? Are we going to look to extend life cycle and the asset life cycle? Because major maintenance and other activities need to ensure that assets are not retired or renewed before it's reached at least an intended end date or a service life of something. So really, what are the objectives? Are we looking to reduce environmental health and safety issues? Are we looking to minimize our labor costs, increase our productivity, or even optimize our spare space out there? So what is it that we're actually looking to focus our attention on from a business objectives point of view? Once we have that in play, well, guess what? Now we can start talking about an EAM strategy. And so are we talking about a reliability-centered maintenance? Are we wanting to drive a condition-based maintenance strategy that's going to monitor the actual condition of the assets and decide what maintenance needs to be done? Or are we going to go into a TPM, a total productive maintenance process that looks to integrate equipment maintenance into our manufacturing process as well and help us shift from that reactive to a corrective mode? Or is it, for instance, good manufacturing practices? Typically, things in the food and drug industries is governed by good manufacturing processes. Is that the business strategy? Or are we ISO driven in terms of international organizational standardization? Or is there a Six Sigma somewhere in there? So what's the business strategy that we're going to apply to drive those objectives that we spoke about? Once that's in place, now we can get to the processes. So what are the processes that guide the business design, the systems design, any automation, and any business processes? So we're talking about asset lifecycle. Are we talking about a work management process? What are the processes that we are looking to drive and to make sure are effectively implemented within our organization? And those processes really do need to be mapped out and put out there. I mean, I think of things, like our spares management. What is our process there? What is the failure reliability? What's our resource management process? What about planning and scheduling? Do we use a single source of the truth, or do we have multiple systems? Do we have third-party systems, and so on? So very important then to get to the processes piece of the puzzle as the next piece. From there, we can now start talking about systems, because inside of the systems now, here we're looking to drive, well, what does that core system need in terms of information, in terms of alignment, in terms of integration, in order to make sure that we have a robust solution that's going to help us manage against the objectives, against the strategy, the processes, etc., that are out there. And we need to be able to pull these various pieces of the puzzle into place. Out of that, then we can start talking about managing the data integrity. Because data integrity, at the end of the day, it's key to our success. We need to ensure that we have the right quality of data, that it is accurate, that it's correct, and it is able to bring all of these things together for us and align us in the direction of where we need to be going. Then we can start processing that data, using it, modeling the data, and getting to a point, where we can start reporting effectively and getting the good results that we need at the end of the day. Finally, that reporting, as I mentioned. And then if we just put all of that together, we're now in a position where, with the single system of truth and everything aligned when working with one another, to ongoing revise our strategy, revise those objectives, and at the end of the day, follow the same process from a planning perspective that I've suggested in this slide so far. So it really is important for us to understand and to pull all of that together. And I think this model pulls it for us nice and tidily to where we need to be. So then let's just talk a bit about work management and enterprise asset management strategy. I mean, the first thing is we're looking to try and make sure that we're managing defects across the entire life cycle. And so we're trying to drive through effective organizational management, asset condition management, reliability strategy, and execution, similar to those 4 pillars that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. And out of that, we want to make sure that at each and every point where there's a possibility of any defect coming into play, that we're able to recognize it, see it, and our mantra needs to be, let's get it right first time. Let's stop the introduction of defects at any one of these steps along the way, and then let's go on an ongoing basis look to reduce any defects, and therefore by implication the need for maintenance going forward. So it really becomes important for us to look at how we're going to do that. And at any one of these points, there could be something introduced that we want to be aware of and take note of. So we saw that then from the EAM strategies that they're a significant contributor to performance. Having those relevant strategies in place are key to success in achieving our operational goals. And what it does, it requires, firstly, effective deployment of our people, process, and technology. Secondly, continuous improvement in terms of what those strategies are about and what they look like. And thirdly, how do we optimize our supply chain, optimize the programs and processes we use, and more specifically the strategy, so that reliability and effectivity of what we're delivering is put into play. I think if we look down the right-hand side, we want to make sure that as we put that strategy together to support the reduction in defects and so on, that we are using, as far as possible, the best experts that we have to develop those strategies. And let's be honest, in our organizations, we have some amazing people who have such good inputs to give, and very often they're not brought into play to help that process. Then to deploy all the time at our assets, we want that strategy deployed consistently across the board. And then we want to be able to use real-time data and real data to focus on the continuation of the evolving strategy and or data. So really important that we get the information, the data, etc., as one source of the truth inside of SAP, because the outcome of that is then it's very easy to redeploy and to update in other places and at other parts of our business. So the strategy piece, really, really important. So let's just talk then very briefly around the defects and the steps that are. So first of all, what is a defect? I think it's probably important for us to talk about that. So a defect, anything that deviates from perfection and leads to customer dissatisfaction, or something that's performing outside the intended design parameters. So those are the defects that we're talking about. Are we negatively impacting our customer, and that's internal, external, etc., or is there something that's supposed to perform in a certain way and is not performing in that way? And what we're looking to do is, how do we ensure that there's a continuous process of improvement aimed at getting rid of those defects? And if there are variations, that we look at, well, how can we fix this, and what are some of the predetermined measures that we will put in place to make sure that we get on top of it? And what that effectively means is that I'm going to share with you what I think just are 3 rules for defect elimination. The first is that all participate. So this is not something that lies with one particular individual. We have some sharp people out there. They're seeing things happening. They're dealing with things on a day-to-day basis. Allow them to be involved in, and let's target one another to say, hey, let's eliminate X number of defects every year. The way we do it is, let's use some small cross-functional teams to be able to take some joint action. And I've found that that's most successful when there's a coming together and a meeting of minds of these cross-functional teams. Everyone knows their piece of the puzzle. It's like you've got your entire football team understands every position, who's doing what as we go along the way. And it's really important to do that. And then we report out, and we celebrate the wins, because the source of those defects, if you look at it, comes from a wide range of areas, whether it's the materials or the process, whether it's discipline within operations and people following the rules, whether it's the workmanship itself of someone affecting the execution, whether it's the materials and availability and maybe losses or storage, etc., or whether it's even the design. And it comes from many, many quarters as well. Sometimes it's something driven by people, it's technology, process, and so on. So these are the sources that we have in terms of where those defects are, how we go after them, and understand that this is a joint effort for us to get after. It's really, really important that we get there. So with that, then, what are some of the major drivers and causes? And I mean, I probably don't need to even mention this to all of you on this call, but really, I mean, these are some of the major causes and drivers of what those defects are, whether it's the systems, the management systems, where people are not operating according to procedure, or their training isn't up to speed, or they don't understand certain hazards that might be facing them, etc. Those management systems are really important to be put in place. Supported then, of course, by operating practices. So we all know what the procedures are. We follow those procedures, and that helps us, in fact, stay safe. It helps us to stay directed. Sometimes it's misapplication. We're applying and using equipment outside of what the design envelope was, what it was intended for. So let's make sure we apply the right tools to the right job, the right equipment, the right materials. Be careful about the workarounds. It could be maintenance practices where we're not following due procedure. It could be age, where we're wearing out or materials are coming to the end of life. It could be substandard materials and spares itself, or it could be some issues with the outsourcing. Very often we're outsourcing to other vendors to control our inventory or to perform certain maintenance tasks, etc. We need to stay abreast and on top of those things so that we can collectively manage those causes of defects, etc. Okay, so let's go on then and just talk a little bit about SAP plant maintenance planning and how that should be working for us. I think it's no secret that we are going to be faced with an incredible increase in terms of the amount of data that's going to be facing us. This little quote from Gartner here talks about 20.4 billion IoT devices by 2020. I think it'd be good to see we're in 2020. We've had COVID, unfortunately. It'd be interesting to see how true that actually became. But I think the bottom line, we all recognize there is a huge amount of data that's going to be coming as a result of it. And what's important for us as we get into this whole idea of performance analysis and enabling more effective reliability is we've got specific things we need to address. So what do we actually want the asset to do? That would be a key question we'd want to ask ourselves around reliability and performance analysis. What is the asset? Where could it fail? What are the causes of each of those failures? What happens when it fails? What are the consequences? And what do we do to prevent and anticipate? Because basically we're looking to put in place a decision matrix that says, well, how are we going to manage within our environment? Are we going to go the condition-based process? Are we going to be time-directed, or do we run to failure? And when it's failure, we just simply replace. Are we task-focused, or is there some diagnostic that we're looking at? Because at the end of the day, one wants to try and move from the reactive to a proactive. And if you look at the staged advances in that, I mean, if we describe what happened while we were just reacting to it, we then diagnose why it happened, which is good, that's moving in the right direction. But we ultimately want to get to a predictive process. When could this happen? And ultimately, what's then the prescription of what we would take, what we would do, and how we would deal with and manage the outcomes. I think there's some really pointed issues there around having an effective decision matrix, having some clear pointed direction in terms of what we're going to focus on in understanding the reliability and so on. So when it comes to our work management, then we're in a situation where this talk of strategy, we talk about EAM strategy, and that is managing the strategy of what's going to be executed, whereas work management is managing the execution of the work. Two slightly different things, and we have to have both working in tandem. So that makes our work management process where we're identifying what the issues are, we're planning how we're going to be dealing with it and who's going to be doing what, we're scheduling accordingly, then we're executing and ultimately closing out. That very same process which we looked in, I think it was slide 4 or 5 early on in the presentation. But this is what needs to be happening, and we have to have a means to come back and start recording these issues. So it's very important that people understand the rationale, the reason, the purpose, why do we do it, and what's in it for the business. And maybe we should have added another column, not only benefits to the business, but what are the benefits to the individual in terms of making sure that we get an effective outcome and we've effectively applied our enterprise asset management process. So I wanted to leave that with you from a work management point of view, and just suggest that we really take time to understand the alignment between the strategy piece of the puzzle, which is really managing what will be executed, versus the work management, which is managing the execution of the work itself. And so that takes us really into planning and scheduling within that work management phase. I wanted to just say effective work management, it requires cross-functional collaboration. And that means getting inputs and commitments brokered from different groups of people and different groups of the business. And that's because the planning and the scheduling, it really does impact multiple role players. That said, there's one thing that's clear, though, is that the the planning and the scheduling roles, they really are, let's call it the glue that brings teams together, enables us to achieve synergy. And as such, the two have got to work closely hand in hand with one another, both the planning and the scheduling. And there might be different individual processes, yes, and maybe there are separate roles in the organization, but they have to be joined at the hip, so to speak, because it's crucial that they work hand in hand to make sure that all steps are covered. And here, if you see what we did, is just at the center of that circle is planning and scheduling, and there are a bunch of folk that are interested, the maintenance teams and the maintenance organization, the production organization, the supply chain organization. All of these have a vested interest and need to be part and parcel of the overall process. So I wanted to put that out there for us. And we can see on the right-hand side that there's just some of the tool sets in terms of Gantt charts, in terms of planning out what the plan looks like, what are the work orders we're going to be going after, etc. And that's standard functionality, which I think most of you are well aware of anyway. So let's then just get to some considerations for S4HANA. Now, this particular one isn't about, well, this is EAM in S4HANA, but I think we do want to touch on some of the considerations that are out there. So, here's a typical value proposition. And of course, when we look at that value proposition, it really is a compelling argument. There's no doubt. And that we can see there's significant options and possibilities to promote proactive managing of asset-related risks and to minimize disruption in the organization. I mean, that's pretty clear. But on its own, is it sufficient? And that would be my question, because I think our EAM teams, we need folk that are well educated, they are equipped, and they have the necessary knowledge. And I think that's incumbent on organizations to make sure that we are educating our people, that we are making sure they are fully equipped to deal with the eventualities, and that the knowledge that they actually need is out there. One of the dangers is we end up becoming really transactional driven, and it's simply push this button and that happens, push this button and that happens, without understanding the impacts up and down the supply chain, without understanding the impacts we have on one another, and some of the concerns and problems that sometimes leads to driving people to do workarounds or maybe not focus with as enough intention as they should. Then there are safety dynamics, etc., etc., etc. So it's really about saying it's great to have this value proposition, and we look at it, and our executives will look at it and say, oh, wow, that's awesome, because we are now really going to be able to do things because we've got all of this stuff and this functionality available for us. I want to just temper that with the whole issue of saying, guys, it's really important that we look to drive in the context of well-equipped people, people who are aligned, and then that whole argument around the cross-functional teams, I think, is also an important one. And with inside of that, then, of course, we know what the goal is. The goal is to help the organization to firstly digitally transform all the processes. We want to enable proactive maintenance strategies as a key driver. And of course, we want to optimize and prioritize the activities that we're going to get involved in, so that there's a single common view of the risks, etc., across the organization. And so the fundamental building blocks for this is really organization. And in this depiction here of S4HANA, we see that organization right there in terms of those four key elements. It's around strategy enablement, risk management, business benefits, employee engagement. And I think it just talks to and aligns itself with what we were speaking about just a moment ago in the previous slide. And of course, here we have it with what's coming down the pipe as far as the EAM perspective inside of S4HANA. What are those primary capabilities? Because it's there where the value comes to being. I mean, we could start off in the PPM space from portfolio project management and kind of call out maybe idea management and resource management. There's two key issues that we need to be making sure we're focusing on. If we talk about assets, operation and maintenance around there, maybe we want to call out the production, the planning and scheduling piece. It's one of those important areas, and maybe then it's also the execution. We want to call those out. In the environmental health and safety, a really important piece of the puzzle, we all know that. And maybe inside of that, we want to call out environment management and change management. The management of change is huge. And as we start embarking on these journeys where we are introducing new functionality and we're bringing S/4HANA into play, and there are changes happening in our organization, moving from maybe old GUIs to Fiori tiles, etc. What is the change management dynamic that we're bringing along and bringing into play to ensure that that's effective? And then, of course, finally, just around the asset network, and then maybe we call out maybe all of those, as important issues. I think the notion of predictive maintenance and service, that becomes a really important driver then for us. So that's kind of what's standing ahead of us. And of course, if you take a look then at what this looks like end to end, it's because we're a connected world. We have to be able to rely on what I keep calling a single source of the truth. And that single source of the truth, being our SAP system, needs to be the way we are building our objectives, where we are defining our strategy, the processes and the data that we need in the system is clearly outlined and defined. We're empowering people to effectively execute using the tool set that they have, and that our asset management process then is supported by both internal and external collaboration partners. So really, at the end of the day, it's about what are the rules that are going to govern us? How are we going to manage cost and risk? How are we going to make sure that we follow the ISO standards that are kind of out there and set for us? But we really do want to make sure that we understand this connectedness, and that connectedness means we need more collaboration rather than less collaboration. So briefly, let me call out just 3 items that I want to highlight, which relate to some of the new improved objects in the S/4HANA EAM suite. The first one is around equipment and tools management. Now, I know it's not new. I mean, this is not new to the EAM space. But certainly, as we move into S/4HANA, the user experience is better, and there is added functionality as far as that's concerned. It's also pretty new, I suppose, from the market, because up until now, there haven't been many clients out there that use equipment and tools management as a core functionality. The second area is around measuring document. Now, this is new functionality to indicate what processing should take place once the measurement reading has been captured. As we go into IoT, and IoT becomes bigger and bigger, the notion of measurements and documenting measurements and using them for better decision making, etc., really comes into its own and becomes very, very important. So I wanted to call it out from that perspective. And then, of course, there's the rotables management. There is a subcontracting monitor. Again, this is not new, but it has been packaged differently, and some of my colleagues say actually packaged properly, which is good. And so the SAP menus have been updated to include this functionality. And again, it's also pretty new to the market. The market hasn't really used this a lot in the past, but I think as we go forward, it will become far more used and far more effective for us. Then, of course, there's the Fiori process. So there's a lot of Fiori layouts and customizable opportunities that are set in place for EAM. And it's going to bring a need for that change management that I spoke about. It brings a need for further education of our people. And it brings us to a point of having to stay on top of what are the new developments. So just in the maintenance management, you can see here's a list of transactional opportunities available. And then there are, in the green, highlighted some of the new stuff that has come on board relating to find maintenance notifications. So it's a tab that you would select, and it'll be able to find the notifications, orders, confirmations, etc., etc., and do some mass maintenance, which we'll talk about and look at in just a moment. So I think the whole Fiori issue becomes a very different dynamic. Our future world will look different, and therefore it's important for us to start to come to grips with that and to understand what do we need to do to bring the organization along to adjust the the structures to adjust people and get them educated and up to speed on where we're at. So with that, there are just 5 issues that I wanted to kind of raise. These five adjustments have been made, and they align to the discussion around the whole Fiori. And the first one here is around the maintenance planning overview. So this is a maintenance planning monitor, and the dashboard obviously is going to be really useful to our planners in managing their work program for a number of reasons. I mean, firstly, from the point of view of new requests, secondly, from the orders and what planning stage they might be in. Any mass completion of orders, we were able to do that using the planning board, viewing any overdue orders that might be out there, missing materials, and then, of course, any requisitions that are either not approved or not yet converted. So it adds a functionality and adds a visibility to the process, and this is really the cloud version that I'm talking about here, but it does add that visibility into where we're going. So the first one was the maintenance planning overview. The second one was around cost analysis. So from a actual cost analysis capability, this is the actual maintenance costs for each equipment type. It can be rolled up on an annual cost of maintenance work for that, and can obviously also be broken down by equipment type, spend analysis, and the like. I think the whole notion of looking at that cost analysis and seeing, what's hurting us and where is it hurting us will be a useful and important process forward. The third is around what's called mass generation of orders for maintenance notification. Now, shock and horror. Many of us say, we don't want to give mass capabilities out to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. We need to be careful of that. But really here, this is around where S/4HANA offers us on the cloud and on the premise an ability to change and view those notifications, find those notifications. In the cloud version, we can't do it specifically in the order. We really need to go to the app and make that conversion. Whereas in the on-premise version, it allows us to go to the work order, and inside the work order, individual notifications, and have those converted and so on. But the bottom line is that here's the opportunity here for some mass generation of those orders, maintenance of those orders, changing of orders, etc., which obviously I think will be very useful, but we need to make sure we manage that, educate our people in terms of how to do so as we go forward. The same then really around the scheduling changes for the notifications and for the orders. So both the scheduling of orders and of notifications, can be found inside of the app and can be used to make those mass changes either to the priorities of the notifications or the work orders priorities and or the required start and the end dates. And we know how important that is, because the start and the end dates really at the end of the day is everything, because there's so much riding on that in terms of executing the work, in terms of getting the materials availability in place, in terms of driving replenishment, because we've now either used or still need to get certain materials. There are many factors that apply into it. So those start and finish dates are really, really important. And I think historically it's always been a challenge where planners have put a a plan in place, and now you get to the end of the plan, they say, well, I'm done and dusted, but now things start to shift. And as we get into reality, the plan doesn't actually equal the schedule, doesn't actually equal the actual, which is right back to the beginning of this presentation where we spoke about the importance of alignment between plan, the schedule, and the actual. And so the start dates and the end dates are really, really important pieces of the fabric that we want to look at. The fifth and the final one really is around inventory turnover analysis. Now, to me, this is really an important measure for all businesses. Wherever we go in organizations, this is one of the measures which we agree with our clients, and it is tracked from the beginning of projects right through to the end. So the ability to be able to view inventory turns either in a specified range or by material types or groups, storage locations, etc., I think is really, really very useful. with that, one was going to be able to look at monthly trends by materials in terms of issues and receipts, the quantities that we've purchased from externally, and this will really start to enhance the analytic power that we have and empower our planners on a day-to-day basis. So I think those are the 5 areas that I wanted to just highlight. Going forward, we could probably do very detailed discussions on each and every one of these and put those either out in the blogs or in another webinar. But for now, I just wanted to highlight those 5 issues. And that brings us kind of full circle. We spoke about EAM as a business imperative and why. We spoke about asset management performance and the frameworks that go with it. We spoke about the integration across functional areas and how EAM plays into that space. We spoke about work management and strategy and how the two need to be congruent and support one another and be aligned. We spoke about how planning can be working for us and the importance of getting scheduling and planning closer to one another and ultimately making sure everything's in one system of the truth. And then we looked at some considerations for S4HANA. So before we get into any questions, just to wrap up, here's a couple of points. I think the journey to EAM does require commitment and effort. This is not a magic button that is put in place and boom, we're ready to rock and roll and all our problems are solved. It does require effort, it does require commitment. There's no doubt about the value and the significance in terms of a real return on investment that EAM brings to play, and we need to be proud about that and proud about the area in which we work. The asset management performance layers that we spoke about, they create the synergy, and that's across organization, condition management, reliability, and execution. I wanted to call that out as well. Effective deployment of people, process, and technology is fundamental to anything. I mean, we could be out of EAM, we could be talking SD, we could be talking production planning, we could be talking IBP. It doesn't make any difference. The deployment of those 3 things and aligning them and making sure that the decision-making data that we use and that we have, and that's at the heart of everything that drives our success, is all aligned with one another and is correct and accurate. We spoke about stopping the introduction of defects early on, looking at every stage possible and to get those defects out as early as possible. We spoke about the optimal SAP EAM data analysis and reporting. And that really does mean effective integration of our planning right from the get-go in order to be able to get the right data and reporting framework in place. We spoke about performance analysis and how that should be built on a sound framework for analytics. And then we spoke about work management and strategy, where strategy is around managing that which has to be executed from a strategy point of view. Work management is really honed in on the execution of the work itself. And then finally, we discussed the S4HANA asset management value proposition and some of the expected changes that are going to be coming. And with that, I'm going to say to you, watch this space because there will be more detail and information that unravels and unpacks as we go. And I think that brings us to the point of any questions. Katie, I don't know if you...
Hi, Sean.
Yeah.
Thank you. We actually do have a question or two for you.
Right.
The first question that I have here is, can proper work management or reliability process have an impact on the bottom line?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, Kelly, those the first 2 slides of this presentation, and I invite people to go back where we talk about the strategic imperative. I think we spoke then and said that maintenance represents somewhere in between 15 and 40% of total product cost. So any dollar saved in maintenance is going to be a cost avoidance and is going to go straight to the bottom line. And if we go by what the research says, that $1 million of savings in maintenance costs contributes the same as in profits as $3 million of sale. If that's a good ratio, well then absolutely it's going to hit the bottom line and it has a significant impact for us.
Okay, great, thank you. And then the second question we have today is, will improvements in the EAM process be beneficial to the rest of their business?
Okay, so will improvements in EAM be beneficial to the rest of the business? And I think absolutely. I mean, we spoke about the integration, but it's not just the integration. I think we will start to see significant improvements in multiple areas. I mean, workforce productivity, we mentioned. There's going to be improvements we'll see there, which impacts right across the business. Reduction in downtime of assets. I mean, that affects everyone. That would be something that would be useful and important. Material cost savings. So the cost savings of material, that impacts the procurement team. It impacts the warehouse team. It impacts the maintenance team, etc. The inventory repair volumes, we start reducing those volumes, we start getting far more productive, etc. So I think absolutely there will be benefits that will be seen across the business, especially given the integrated nature of what we're dealing with.
All right, and it looks like we have one last question, which is, what are the key factors for driving the value?
All right, I want to put it from 2 points of view. If we talk about an execution perspective, then it's, guys, let's get it right first time. Let's stop the introduction of defects at every step, and let's reduce those defects and therefore the need for maintenance. So that's on an execution side. From a broader strategy side, I think it's around the organizational management dynamic we spoke about as one of the layers. It's around asset condition management. The third one I would think is the reliability, a reliability strategy, and then of course the execution management that comes with it. So those to me would be the factors driving value at an organizational level as well as an execution level.
Okay, thanks, Sean. It looks like that was the last question that we had for today.
Okay.
So if there are any additional questions, feel free to contact us with the information here on the screen, and we're happy to get back to you. We also will have this webinar posted on our website at Reveal Value under the Resources tab, and then all of our other previously recorded webinars will be there as well. Our next webinar is going to be taking place on August 19th, and that's turning SAP into an asset by increasing customer satisfaction. And this is going to be presented by Anna Watson. And we'll go ahead and get that information out to you in advance so you can go ahead and get registered. So with that, I just want to let everybody know, thank you for attending. Have a great day and stay safe. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, and thanks for joining.
Bye, Sean.
Bye-bye now.